OAAA Harris Poll webinar featuring seasonal and automotive category insights that define very important opportunities for the out-of-home industry. I'm Steve Micklin, Senior Vice President of Marketing Analytics at the OAAA. Before I begin, let's cover a few quick housekeeping topics. We welcome your questions throughout the webinar, and please feel free to submit them using the Zoom chat function. If we can't get to your question, we will follow up with you individually after the webinar. And lastly, all of our webinars are featured on our website in the webinar library, which you can access from the Stay Connected tab. A recording of this session, along with the entire PowerPoint deck of today's presentation, will be made available later this afternoon. We also have an executive summary and supporting infographics that you can also access. We are honored very much to have with us once again the Harris Poll CEO, John Gersma, who will be presenting their latest research. I think you're going to be very motivated by the findings, which support our clients' use of out-of-home as a highly effective marketing tool for the upcoming seasonal shopping seasons, summer travel, and also the automotive category in particular. John, it's great to have you back. I read last week the US Department of Commerce released their 2021 retail trade report, which showed US retail sales jumped 18% for the previous year. And it was one of the strongest years in US retail history, growing more than twice as fast as any of the previous years. Here's one of the most interesting components of the report. Brick and mortar stores grew faster than e-commerce for the first time ever. The physical store growth was 18.5% versus the e-commerce growth of 14.2%. The report also detailed an important reminder for all of us in out-of-home. In 2019, e-commerce sales represented just 10.7% of all retail sales. In the midst of the pandemic in 2020, e-commerce grew to 13.6% of all retail sales and dipped slightly to 13.2% in 2021. I think the most important takeaway about this data is that physical store shopping remains the overwhelming choice of consumers. But as we'll see emphasized in today's research, out-of-home has a huge competitive advantage in our ability to derive impact in both the physical and e-commerce retail arenas. So to get us underway, I'm going to turn the presentation over to John. Welcome.
Hey, Steve, how are you? And hi, everybody. It's great to be back again with you guys. You know, it's interesting what you're saying, Steve, about the rise of brick and mortar stores sales. And I think as we get into this, you're going to see sort of interesting data. You're going to have some headwinds that things that we understand, right? Which is economics, energy prices, geopolitical events that on one hand should be sort of pretending to, maybe patent down a little bit of the excitement around travel, but that's not what we're seeing. We're actually seeing 85% of Americans are planning to take a vacation this summer, and their preferred mode is by car. And I'm going to get to that sort of insight by kind of starting by looking at a few of these different events. We can kind of maybe at the end in the Q&A sort of get some perspectives from some of the other folks that might be on the call that in terms of what they're seeing in their business. So let's start and look at first what we did. So we were in the field between the 9th and the 14th of February. In the full report, you'll sort of see as what I'm going to take you through. We're going to start macro, talk about society and economy, going to get into commuting and summer travel, go deeper on seasonal shopping, go specifically into the category of out-of-home, as well as auto. And then I've got some key takeaways at the end that I'll touch on that are a little bit more for sort of reading and absorbing at the end. Okay, so let's start with society. I mean, Steve, one of the most interesting things that we're seeing in our Harris Poll trended data, and this is data now out of the Harvard Harris Poll that we just fielded 2 weeks ago. It's about 10 days old, actually. But this is a monthly poll that we do with Harvard on American voter sentiment. And we ask, what would you say are the most important issues facing the country today? And we ask people to select 3. And what's interesting is the voters this month, for the first time since February of 2020, have a new #1 issue, which is economy and jobs at 33%. And that's because coronavirus, while still important at 26%, is down 10 points from last month. So you see a shifting of attention. The other things that you see that are always present in concerns with Americans are both immigration, healthcare, and then you can see the significant tick up in terrorism, national security that has been brought about by the tragic events in Ukraine. With that, crime and drugs are another major concern among Americans, followed by a range of other issues. But I think that's the big headline here, is that the swing is sort of shifted away from COVID toward the economy. And why we know that is that we have been in the field every week doing a weekly COVID tracker since March of 2020. I think I had hair when I started this weekly tracker. But what you can see through this is a significant change over the past week leading into the past weekend of March 6th, where we see the concerns of a global recession now at 76%, up 2 points. But let me focus your attention on the things that are all going down, right? That's fear of a new wave, down 4 points to 63%. Fear of losing one's job associated to COVID is now down to an extremely low level, reaching almost the level pre-Delta at 46%, down 4 points. So a lot of sort of evidence there that the mind shift in America is shifting away for the moment from the pandemic toward the economy. And that's related to this, again, sort of a monthly poll that we have been tracking since February 16th with Harvard. And what we see when we ask the simple question, how strong do you think the US economy is today? Strong being green and weak being red. You can see that with the advent of really right around the American withdrawal from Afghanistan, leading in to the rise of the Omicron wave, sort of in July, working into September, we have now had seven straight months of negativity, leading to 63% of Americans saying that the economy is weak versus only 37% saying that it's strong. And if you track back over, you can see again where this negativity began, right back here in the middle of February 2020, when the fortunes sort of changed in America. So another thing we ask in our polling is, what is your greatest and second greatest concern? Just to try to get on the minds of voters of what's really worrying them. What are the kitchen table issues with their families across the country? And clearly the greatest issue is now inflation at 31%. It's also the second greatest concern at 20%. So that takes you to the majority of Americans, slightly at 51%. And that is sort of significantly higher than the second issue, which would be foreign policy issues like Ukraine. Again, a massive, new, important, urgent geopolitical event that's coming home to America. The war in Europe, the first war since World War II. And so what you're looking at there is 29% concern, but then look right behind it are energy prices. And we'll get into that and talk about it, followed by crime and immigration. So one of the things about inflation, it's a very simple economic term, is as opposed to unemployment, inflation is incredibly sort of in your face. It's very, very omnipresent. It's very visible, right? We see that as we drive through our towns and we see gas prices on gas stations. We see prices of chicken at the supermarket. And so with inflation, when we ask Americans, do you believe it will taper off in gray? Not very many folks think that. Do you believe it'll stay high in blue or get even higher? You're literally looking at 83% of Americans believe it'll either stay high at 40% or get even higher at 43%. And then interestingly enough, as it was related to some of the significant sort of tension between getting President Biden's Build Back Better plan approved, even though infrastructure was approved, one of the reasons perhaps behind a lot of the headwinds in the BBB plan was the fact that Americans actually believed that would actually increase inflation. So Americans right now are currently in a very retrenched mode, a concern about geopolitical events, obviously worried about the war in Ukraine, worried about fuel prices and inflation, and not really wanting the government to spend more money. And that's because inflation has also impacted Americans' ability to save. So we ask, has the increasing price in goods and services affected your ability to save this year? And we see that 59%, nearly 6 in 10 Americans believe that it has, definitely or somewhat, including nearly a third saying that it definitely has impacted their sense of saving. And that gets predominantly impacted by millennials, those cash-strapped families that are typically, potentially having children in their groups, in their families, and then also BIPOC Americans. And yet also we see that Americans are less liquid. They've got less spare cash than they did last year. So what you're seeing here is the tapering off of the PPE programs, the sort of the readjustment of interest rates and other things that are putting more downward pressure on consumers. And so when we ask, do you have more or less spare cash than you did a year ago, about 55% of Americans, particularly rather, those making under 100K, those numbers go up, say that they have less cash on hand, with about almost a third saying they have about the same amount. And then we've also asked, has the rising price of goods and services caused you to have this dynamic of having less spare cash? And 6 out of 10 Americans see that connection. And then 23% say other expenses have sort of caused that. So again, inflation being highly visible really hits America's pocketbooks, and it's something that they sort of directly equate to their current financial sort of malaise, which is something we also see in our Harris poll data, where nearly 2/3 of Americans say that their personal financial situation is worse this year than it was last year. Now, that's the bad news, but the good news is, not that this is a good news slide, but the good news is how Americans are interpreting this issue of sort of less cash and higher prices. And that is that Americans have really come together around supporting Ukraine. And there is a sense of unity that cuts across party lines. And it also impacts the way that they're thinking about inflation and spending, specifically, Steve, when it comes to looking at gas prices. So we ask, do you agree or disagree that American companies should currently be doing business in Russia, given the country's invasion of Ukraine? And here you have an emphatic 3/4 of Americans disagree, especially baby boomers, those that are very much more familiar with the Cold War. But those numbers are strong, even among Gen Z and millennials. So the majority of all Americans, significantly at 3/4 disagree that American companies should be in Russia doing business. And that's the backdrop behind a lot of the decisions you've seen, from Levi Strauss to a range of other companies that have Pepsi, McDonald's, that are divesting or pulling back their operations. And then also, do you support or oppose banning Russian oil imports to America right now, even if it leads to higher gas prices? I think this is really an important chart here, because obviously the president has now restricted that somewhat 9 to 10% of Russian oil that comes in to fulfill America's energy supply. But with that, Americans, 7 out of 10, are actually understanding and supporting of banning Russian oil, understanding that that may even lead to higher prices at the pump. So that is a significant, I think, sort of support around a rally around the flag, around supporting national security, and around Americans sort of intuiting and understanding that higher energy prices may be a clear function of a connection to a macro event, namely Putin. And I also think it becomes interesting as we build out of that and start to think of now specifically more about travel and about the industry for out of home. It's so important to understand that Americans, as I showed you in that previous chart, have been surfing variance, right? This has been sort of a game of whack-a-mole, where we get back out there, there's a variant that emerges, we retrench, we go back into lockdowns, or we reduce our activities. And that has created, obviously, a lot of backup travel planning. It's created a lot of uncertainty. But now we're entering a new phase where these are just significantly higher numbers than we've seen since the reopening back in March of 2020, where Americans basically miss everything and they want to get back out there. These are really big numbers. 3/4 miss gathering with friends and family, dining out in restaurants, getting together and celebrating in person. Because again, you have to remember how Omicron created a lot of disruption into our traditional holiday season at the end of last year. So you've got a lot of families that haven't been together since Kwanzaa, Hanukkah, Christmas, Halloween, Thanksgiving, whatever you want to say. Those gatherings didn't largely happen across the states. And so now people are wanting to get back. Also, just as Steve pointed out, shopping in stores, there's a strong, significant sort of intention stat there at 68% that supports Steve's retail numbers, that people want to get back to the experience of shopping. They also want to go to a social gathering at 64%. They want to attend a concert, a theater, sporting events. The majority, nearly 6 out of 10 Americans, and even going back to movie theaters, coffee shops, getting back to church, even traveling on an airplane. These are the highest numbers that we have seen since the reopening, as I said earlier. So this portends significant sort of optimism as we sort of head into the back half of the year, and particularly into the busy summer travel season. And that's also related to a real simple question we've been asking in the Harris Poll data since the beginning of the pandemic. We ask simply, with respect to COVID, do you believe the worst is behind us in green, or is the worst ahead of us in orange? And you can see how these two numbers have crossed over significantly during various sort of key milestones. A Delta outbreak, which drove pessimism, right? That the orange numbers started to go up, the orange line. The cases receded, it went down, the green came back, Omicron came back, obviously around late fall into early December, and that sort of created another spike. But now we're seeing a lot of optimism that with the cases basically eroding in the public eye around the third week of January, we're now looking at almost 8 weeks of optimism, leading up to 68% of Americans now saying that the worst is behind us. And that's significant because that's creeping all the way up close to that 76% number of June of last year when things sort of officially reopened. So it's getting back out there and it's getting on with life. And we're seeing that in a real simple chart that shows what's going up on the far right-hand side. And literally everything is shooting back up. And importantly, all of this involves transportation. It involves getting in cars and getting out there and experiencing the world. And so that is visiting family or friends, even without a mask, is at 54%, up 5 points over the past week. Going out for drinks or dinner indoors, 44%, up 6 points this past week. Staying in a hotel, as I did last night, 44%, up 5 points. All these numbers are up really high, from flying on a plane to attending, taking public transportation even, attending large concert and sporting events. So it's basically saying that it's time to get back out there, let's stop hibernating and let's get going. I think what's really important to that is this dynamic around why we feel more confident. Now, we see in our data, nearly 7 out of 10 Americans have been vaccinated. Roughly 5 out of 10 have been boosted across our demographics rather. And they also have this sense of a little bit of an understanding that this is no longer a pandemic, but it's an endemic, right? This is a seasonal flu in sort of parlance is what I'm taking away from this data. But we asked, now that variants emerge and COVID cases have climbed and receded and climbed again, do you believe that the virus is now part of daily life, or is it going to be eradicated? And literally less than 3 in 10 believe it will eventually be eradicated. 7 out of 10 believe that we'll be living with COVID in some form forever. And I think that's created a mind shift in America, where we're moving past a victory to sort of a coexistence. And you see that across the demographics, real consistent responses, whether you're vaccinated or even unvaccinated, whether you live in a big city or you're in a rural area. there is a belief that COVID is sort of here to stay, and let's find a way to live with it. And I think what also has created with that is a little bit of emboldenment. So we asked the 60% of Americans who told us they are not very likely to wear their masks now as a result of this past weekend. Well, we asked them why. Why do you feel comfortable not wearing a mask? And you can see strong numbers here where nearly half of all those folks, including Gen Pop, say, I just want to get back to normal. I'm tired of wearing masks. Others cite being vaccinated. Others have cited issues of efficacy around masks. Others still said that indoor mask mandates should have stopped months ago. And then toward the bottom, there were those that said, I never wanted to wear a mask in the first place. And you get into the government shouldn't be telling me what to do. You get the I'm boosted and a couple of other things in there that are less sort of top of mind with most Americans. But the main thing here is that Americans feel they're vaccinated and they want to get back to normal. And so this sense of sort of getting back out there and being a little bit more fearless is definitely in the American psyche right now. And I think that's significant because at the same time, we asked Americans, how likely do you believe another serious variant similar to Delta or Omicron might surface this year? You know, will it surface in 2022 in the US? And 8 out of 10, 83% believe that is likely. Now that's ticked down 4 points since January 9th, but that's still a very significant number. We were, you know, nearly in 9 and 10. So people are a little understanding that, you know, we are in this era now where variants are going to come and go, and we need to deal with them. And with that comes every essence that you can think of. FOMO, YOLO, all those different acronyms are all around this sense of sort of feeling interrupted. I think that's the biggest word I'd use in all this, is that Americans have lived in this stop, start, you know, stop, continue, backwards, one step forward sort of life. And in this very herky-jerky sort of manner, it's created a lot of frustration and a lot of desire to get back out there. And so when we asked, you know, please select all that apply among people that are making travel plans. And again, 85% of Americans say they're planning summer travel with personal cars as that top pick. Keep in mind that, and you look at the types of things they want to do, they're very significant. It's vacations, it's catching up on healthcare appointments or treatments, it's concerts, you know, it's moving living locations. You know, part of the Great Resignation has been also a great redistribution of where people live, whether it's, you know, sort of traveling into a new city for a new job or working remotely. That has another implication in terms of people's mobility. And then, you know, good old fashioned shopping sprees, dating, getting back out there to weddings, you know, switching jobs, et cetera. So a lot of mobility is at play as people are making up for lost time. But I wanted to stop for a second and just talk about the assumptions that we make about demographics. And I think as you're thinking about your business and you're thinking about the strategic use of out of home, I think it's also really important to understand target audiences. And typically, you know, we tend to stay focused on demographics like 18 to 54. We talk about people with high disposable income, and we're always talking about millennials and Gen Z. Well, let's stop for a second and talk about seniors. Let's talk about sort of those older boomers on up to the greatest generation. And this is a quite an interesting chart, I believe, that's trended out of our COVID tracker. And it looks at all throughout the pandemic, how seniors 65 plus basically sort of had attitudes about COVID. And what you see in this chart, quite simply, is that they were the first to get back out there. They were your early adopters for getting on with life. And so you can see the fear of a new wave is in the brown line. The fear of returning to normal activity is in the blue line. The fear of dying from COVID is in the orange line. And you see these really curious things. I put in a couple data points comparing seniors to Gen Z. And one of the things is that during the middle of early parts of COVID, you know, back in mid second quarter of 2020, 37% of seniors feared dying, while Gen Z was at 50%. Got that? 37% for seniors, fear of dying, 50% for Gen Z. So the Chicken Little data continues as you go over onto towards the Delta outbreak here, where you can see fear of dying at 54%. Gen Z was 10 points higher. Even at Omicron, 37%, Gen Z at 46%. And now literally as of this past 2 weeks, 38% versus Gen Z at 46%, just on that trended line. The couple things about this are super interesting to me anyway, which is that one is that, seniors were literally the first ones back out there. They were also the ones that are most optimistic. So as you're thinking about demographics and thinking about targeting, make sure you've got seniors in your strategy, because they are the ones that are out there, getting back out there, socializing, making trips to see their grandkids, and to get out and go have lunch and get back out there. The other thing about seniors is that they were the first to basically resume life in earnest. Similar dynamics here. We looked at the blue line, are you comfortable socializing without a mask? And the green line, are you comfortable dining indoors? And you have the same exact thing happening. Look at the seniors on the blue. They were comfortable socializing without a mask at 70%, when millennials were at 45 and Gen Z were at 42. Same sort of situation about dining indoors. If you just follow those lines across, you see significant sense of optimism with seniors and more fearlessness about getting back out there and resuming public activities than you did the younger generations, which is completely counterintuitive based on sort of the health issues and the health risks that seniors would face vis-a-vis most younger Americans. So I think that's an interesting segue into commuting and summer travel and looking at how all Americans are sort of thinking about getting back out on the road. And I'll preface this, as you go through this data, I think there's an interesting sort of theme here around objects versus experiences. And I think what we're seeing is we do have stress on savings. We do have inflation, obviously, and we have higher energy prices. And those are all sort of downward pressures on consumer spending. But what I think I've shown you thus far in the data is a lust for experiences. And so I would argue that objects are going to be more elastic in the coming quarters than experiences. And so as you think about the consumer's pocketbook, there's going to be more opportunities for getting back out there, definitely spending money in stores and going to retail, but it's also going to be getting out and doing things and having these experiences, whether that's hotel stays, which is very high in our data in terms of the things that are ticking back up. This is a question where we asked Americans to select all that apply regarding to items that they're planning to purchase in the coming weeks. And this is hotel stays, shoes and footwear. Well, you got to be mobile, plane tickets, going out clothes, concert tickets, all the way down the list. You see sort of lots of different events that sort of are related more toward mobility and getting back out there. And then also importantly, that this pandemic comfort level really continues to rise for all modes of transportation. Now, this has not been the case in our data over the past 2 years. There was significant aversions, particularly on the right-hand side, to trains, to ride shares, taxis, and subways. We're seeing those tick up. And clearly personal cars that have always been very high are even higher today at 98% and lead the way. Also importantly, Americans are getting out into new markets. So you've got tourists flocking back into cities. You've got business travel ticking up, which is what you see in that commercial flight, also related to the hotel stays chart that I just showed. Again, as you're thinking about these numbers, strong potential here targeting all different types of folks, but particularly millennial men and women, inside urban areas. A lot of this points toward more exciting sort of dynamics of travel and potential exposure to out of home in urban markets, but also suburban as well. And then we asked, if you're going to travel this summer, how will you travel? What mode will you apply? Again, please select all that are relevant. And we sort of looked at this across different spectrums. We had in the gray 2020 holidays, 2021 summer in beige, sort of a light red first half of 2022, and that dark red on the right-hand side is the summer of 2022. And what you can see again here is that, personal vehicles are leading the way. Airplanes are still relevant, followed by trains, buses, subway, light rail, and other forms of transportation. Again, similar dynamics among millennials in urban cities, but also sort of, boomers getting back out there like we talked about with those previous charts. So this looks to be a very robust, inclusive, great American gathering where vacations are back on the top agenda, getting together with family, getting back out to see business colleagues, going to conventions. This type of activity is really in play right now, according to our OAAA Harris Poll data. Also, getaways, beach vacations are very top of mind for Americans this summer. We asked, thinking ahead, how likely are you to take the following kinds of trips this summer? Very likely being in orange, down to not at all likely being in that dark brown. And we contrasted it versus last summer's data. And you can see getaway to a different city or town is actually 10 points higher than it was last summer after things reopened. So 78% versus 68%. Same sort of story, a 10-point bump on vacations to a resort, beach, or elsewhere. Same, less so slightly on extended stay with family or friends. Maybe we're a little tired of our pandemic pods. Maybe we want to get out and hike or camp, but this feels to me, looking at this data, this is more like take some big swings, take some big trips, maybe take a series of trips, but get out and get back out there and start to resume. Again, I think this chart supports that sort of theory I have around objects versus experiences. And this is going to be the year for a lot of experiences in getting back out. And when we're going to buy objects, obviously, we're going to do that less online, as Steve talked about at the beginning, and more in our cars to get out to stores that we miss. So this summer, Americans also plan to take more vacation days. Again, there's a lot of other data that we have at the Harris Poll that looks at significant stress. We run an APA, American Psychological Association Harris Poll data on mental health and wellness. We also run with CVS, a CVS National Health Project. And in both studies, we're seeing significant sort of across demographics concerns around feeling burned out, about feeling this existential threat of all this stuff that's going on in our world, and how that's taking a toll on people's anxiety. And so part of this, we think, is also the desire to sort of take some time off and to really get into one of those good, proper pre-2020 style of vacations and time for us to rest and rejuvenate. And so again, we see that in the data here. How many days do you plan to take for vacation this summer? We said, please select one. Well, again, comparing the dark green in 2022 versus the light green in 21, you've got an uptake in where nearly 1 in 5 are taking more than 2 weeks. Another third, more than a third, almost a third rather, 27% are taking 2 weeks. And then about 3 in 10 taking 1 week, and a few that are behind that are going to be workaholics. But if you take those two numbers together, the 2 weeks to the more or 2 weeks, that's nearly half of all Americans, right? 48% are going to get out there past 2 weeks. So this feels like one of those big summers for getting back out and having that traditional long vacation. And significantly within the data, when we look at the demo cuts, you see significant sort of activity among different folks, especially those boomers at 33% that are going to go past 2 weeks. But again, the same sort of dynamic exists across all these demographics, where 2 weeks is literally the standard, followed by some even going higher than 2 weeks toward even 3 weeks or more. Younger generations are the ones that are a little more local this summer, and this potentially also has an implication for your out-of-home targeting and the way that you're thinking about your spending here. But we asked approximately what is the farthest distance you plan to travel to reach any of your summer travel destinations. one way. And we did see the under 50 miles, the local, pop a little bit more with Gen Z and millennials, far less so than boomers. Boomers and those folks that are in the suburbs, as well as folks in urban markets, all were significantly more apt to be traveling on a more of a national basis. They were more free rangers, if you will. But again, these numbers sort of support a lot of people getting out and driving a lot of different sort of mileages in order to sort of take the trips that they're going to take, whether it's for business or for pleasure. So I think that, again, significantly focuses strategies as we're thinking about out of home. And also 3/4 of Gen Z travelers say they're going to be staying at a hotel this summer. So we asked for accommodations that they plan to use. 63% of Americans, nearly a third, 2/3 rather, say they'll be staying in hotels. Again, with Gen Z, that number goes up to almost 3/4 at 73%. Others are going to be staying at a family or friend's house. Others are going to be doing Airbnbs, VRBOs, rentals at nearly 3 in 10. But again, millennials and Gen Z go a little bit higher there. And then there's resorts, about 1/4 of Americans, followed by camping, about 1 in 5 Americans, cabbing and cruise lines. Even the cruise line industry, which has been significantly underwater, no pun intended, in our data. There was significant concern around going back onto a cruise. Those numbers are even starting to tick up ever so slightly. So then we asked, well, where are you likely to visit each of the following locations this summer, assuming there's no public health restrictions? And so the somewhat likely in light blue and the very likely, we have sort of cumed that up to give you a number on the right in the blue, which is 2022. And again, you can see beaches and lakes, 3/4. National state parks are still strong at 57%, as they have been during the whole pandemic. Museums, getting back out to culture, movie theaters, zoos, fairs, local festivals, a lot of these things that have been canceled, interrupted, for 2 years. We're literally moving into our 3rd year of not having many of these events. There seems to be a lot of FOMO around that. And then there's always the destination cities, whether it's Vegas or New York or the other major cities across the US. Significant desire to get back to amusement parks, casinos, as we've talked about, concerts, sporting events, and live performances, and even trade shows. So a lot of leisure activity here, clearly, with the summer months coming, but also a little bit of business activity as well. But again, robust numbers if you compare them with respect to last summer. And again, remember, last summer was kind of our official opening. We didn't know about Delta at the time. We didn't know about Omicron. We thought we were vaccinated and sort of clear of all this. So the fact that that optimism has come back against the 2021 numbers, and numbers that are even stronger, suggests this sense that we are living with the pandemic. We are aware there are going to be more variants coming, and we are ready to get out there and to rock and roll regardless. And I think, that's really important also with respect to business, because also, employers are asking their employees to come back to the office. And we say, thinking ahead, which of the following best describes your expected work situation for the following timeframes? And what we can see is that there's a significant group of folks that are either hybrid working or commuting every day back into the office. And these numbers have continued to grow, where you now have 84% of professional workers saying they're doing a mix of hybrid and commuting. So again, the fact that the hybrid line is so small in the summer of 2022, the mix rather, at 20%, 64% saying they're commuting every day, is obviously significant exposure to out of home. And again, those numbers pop even higher among younger workers, among millennials, even boomers, as we look at these numbers, and even across rural Americans. So, with that, we'll go into 2 last sections, and then we'll wrap it up and do some Q&A here. I'll be done real briefly, but spring and summer seasonal shopping, we're seeing that 2/3 of urban in cities 1 million plus and millennials, they really find out of home ads useful for special occasions. So we asked them, when you see advertisements in the following locations, do you find them useful when thinking about products for upcoming sort of events? And 42% of the general public see that, especially those in urban environments, which makes a lot of sense if they're relying on out of home to sort of prompt them, whether that's for gifts for holiday events, Mother's Day, Father's Day, weddings, graduations, these ever-present, omnipresent reminders of sort of things that one needs to get done are definitely something that are useful, and they particularly work well on the right-hand side with urban consumers at 66%, and those sort of potentially millennial men that aren't always on the ball with stuff they need to get done. Out of home most influences special occasion buys, however, for young consumers and urbanites. We asked, when considering purchases for each of the following holidays or events, how much will billboard, outdoor video screen, poster, signage, other outdoor ads influence your purchasing decisions? And we looked at this across the spectrum of coming events this spring and summer. And again, you see significant impact, somewhat or very much, at 39% for Mother's Day, Father's Day at 33%, weddings at 31%, and graduations at 28%. So again, thinking tactically around the return of America, the reopening of America, perhaps the theater two, the second coming of the returning of America, but it's back again. People are coming back out, and you can use out of home to really remind them to celebrate these great gatherings of friends and family. Now, also, flower, gift cards, and tools were the most popular items for Mother's Day and Father's Day with regards to those types of purchases. So thinking ahead to holidays and events this spring and summer, we asked, what purchases do you plan to make for each? And we asked them to select your top 3 most likely choices. Flowers, not surprisingly, at 34%, gift cards, chocolates or sweets at 21%, jewelry, and then clothing. Those numbers pop a little bit on flowers for millennial men. And then dads aren't getting the flowers. Come on, dads like flowers. We got to get the dads flowers too. That is coming in more at gift cards at 24%, tools, clothing, cologne, liquor, wine, and beer. So a couple of data points there on products. And then with regards to weddings and graduation, again, we haven't had these great American gatherings, right? So graduations are back, and so are weddings. Some of these have been put off as long as almost 3 years. Well, that's about gift cards in both cases. Also flowers, clothing, shoes, jewelry, liquor, wine, and beer on the graduation side, and kitchen appliances, liquor, wine, and beer, home furnishings, vacation trips on the wedding side. So lastly, let's look at out-of-home relevance and then touch on the out-of-home sector. What we're seeing here is that younger generations and urbanites in 1 million plus cities are noticing out-of-home at the highest rates pre-COVID. I think this is really significant. As you trend across these lines, you can see that now 43% say that they are noticing billboards, outdoor screens, out of home in general, much more or slightly more at 43%. And again, those numbers skew up significantly inside urban markets of cities 1 million plus at 62%. And Gen Z and millennials lead the way in noticing out of home, again at 63 and 59%. Also, I think it's really important to note that we are completely exhausted by this, right? Just doing our phones, and there's a lot of sort of suggestions that out of home, we believe, can prosper by the fact that people are consciously trying to do more digital detoxing. And 2 data points here, how much do you agree or disagree with each of the following statements? One significant, nearly 8 out of 10 Americans say that they agree that I'm annoyed by ads that interrupt my viewing, listening, or reading experiences. There's also clearly concerns around data, security, and privacy. But it was interesting, that third line, these days I spend so much of my time looking at screens that I often tune out digital ads. That's at 68%, including nearly 8 out of 10 millennial men. And then, this Questions around security continues to be a significant issue among two-thirds of Americans. And then right at the bottom, another really important point around digital detox, where nearly half of all Americans say that at this point in the pandemic, I'm trying to spend less time on my phone or computer and reduce my television viewing. So, we're perhaps maxed out on our screens, subscriptions. We have the weather getting nicer. We are focused on experiences, and we want to get back out and enjoy life. And I think that that's a real interesting sort of connection of a lot of different data. So lastly, we'll focus on automotive out-of-home insights. We asked, do you recall seeing recently an out-of-home advertisement or others for an automotive brand or dealership? And that is yes at 38%, no at 47%, but among those 4 out of 10 that have seen out-of-home for automotive brand or dealership, you see a significant skew again in cities at 52%, also slightly higher for men at 49%, as well as millennials and younger Americans, younger consumers, Gen Z and millennials. And then, what's driving the connection between which type of out-of-home messages that you've seen that most likely interest you, what really seems to be driving that with respects to automotive are definitely the focus on new models in fuel economy and any sort of special dealer pricing. So new models were at 45%, skewing a little bit higher among men. Fuel economy at 37%, clearly an issue of our times right now. That gets skewed again at urban, but even rural. And then limited offers and pricing. So anything in out-of-home that's reinforcing economy, news, and also sort of scarcity, limited time deals seem to be the things that are really driving information in the auto sector. And then, 4 out of 10 Americans told us that they engaged with automotive out-of-home ads. And what was driving that, number one, were digital activations. So for those billboards and out-of-home elements, what has led you to do the following? And 43% have engaged with an automotive out-of-home ad. From that, they visited a brand or dealer's website at 38%, significantly higher at 44% among rural Americans. They did online research with that brand or dealer at the same amount, again, skewing rural. Then they shared word of mouth is nearly 3 in 10. And even 23%, almost a quarter of American consumers visited a brand's dealer, store, or showroom after engaging with out-of-home. So it is a significant, important strategy, particularly within the automotive industry, particularly at a time with higher energy prices and consumers are sort of rethinking a couple of things, rethinking a new car. Many of them have probably been sort of strangled by the supply chain snarls that have maybe interrupted their regular sort of buying and leasing patterns. And so with this new activity, as supply chains sort of continue to unwind, hopefully you're seeing more availability of vehicles and a potential for out-of-home to really make a difference as consumers get back into a market that many of them haven't been into over the past 3 years. So I'm going to leave it there, Steve, rather than maybe drive through the takeaways. I know we only have 10 minutes. I'll leave this for the reading, but I will hit the headlines. We're definitely seeing that workers are going back to the office, with 8 out of 10 expect to be commuting. We definitely see the pandemic continues to drive out-of-home awareness, again, with nearly half of consumers saying that they're noticing out-of-home more than before the pandemic. On the third point, we are finally seeing a breakthrough where there is more inclusive modes of travel and transportation, which is going to open up out-of-home to lots of different eyeballs in different sorts of form of transport. And that is a significant change that we haven't seen in our data since the beginning of COVID. So as a strategy, be thinking across channels and platforms. This is now involving trains, it's involving subways, ride shares, et cetera. And you've got that big number, 8 out of 10 Americans want to get back out there and take that vacation, and they're going to take more time this summer, and a lot will be doing it in the outdoors. And lastly, as I just talked about, out-of-home is driving awareness for holiday gift purchases. Gift purchases by younger consumers and urbanites are more likely to be influenced by out-of-home ads. Nearly 4 out of 10 with respect to automotive, as we just discussed, are seeing those ads. And clearly, the same number is engaging with them, and they're driving them toward activity. So a lot to kind of rip through there in 50 minutes, but I want to make sure, Steve, we had some time to kind of digest it and discuss it. Thank you very much.
John, you always do such a great job presenting the information. I can't thank you enough. And I think, the areas that you emphasize just really offer even greater insight to our members. I want to kind of touch a base on those before we only have a few questions. So maybe a little more dialogue in here. But I think, the really fantastic takeaway from this really great research that you and your team did is, it's really all good news for the out-of-home industry. I do want to throw a caveat in there. Obviously, the world situation has really changed over the course of the last 3 weeks. And we did complete fielding of this study about a week before Russia invaded Ukraine. So that's a little bit of a question mark, obviously. But as I move closer to this particular age category, the seniors, it's kind of surprising, right? Initially, when you see some of those, that they're the least concerned about COVID, and they're the ones that are getting out there more, and so on. But when you think about that, they want to continue to experience living, right? And so they're going to be taking more vacation. So I think that's a real flag for a lot of our clients and prospects, is if those folks are targeting, a little bit older demographic, it's really important that we're on top of that and speaking to those particular brands and advertisers. Loved your focus on, how different product categories maybe are going to be a little more elastic than others, with, the differentiation that you made there with the experiences, that there's probably going to be more consumer commitment to spending in that arena than with objects. And then one of the things that I thought was really interesting, obviously during COVID, most of us were trying to avoid hotels, but that whole staying with family and friends thing, everybody's over that.
Completely.
Dramatically, yeah. As we look at this upcoming retail season, I think something that really popped to me is the popularity of gift cards. And so if I'm selling out of home in my local market and I know my client sells gift cards, I think that's an important flag for what we saw in particular was weddings, graduations. And don't feel too bad. I think that those dads are getting wine or getting alcohol and stuff, according to the data. Yeah. But I think one of the things that I loved most about this research was that automotive category data. There's some really strong evidence about how out-of-home drives online activation with auto dealers. And that's really, I think for so many of them, that's what they're trying to accomplish, is getting consumers onto their websites and following them on social media, et cetera, so they can then convert them to a showroom visit. And so this survey shows how solidly out-of-home performs there. I think it's just really terrific. The couple of questions that we did get, I'm going to just go ahead and answer those myself. Are there more Harris Poll surveys planned for the year? Yes, these have been terrific for our membership. We've got 2 additional surveys planned this year. We'll be releasing one in June that's going to have a back to school focus. And we'll also do some additional really important product categories, just like we did automotive this time. And then we will release another one in September that's going to be focused once again on holiday shopping and travel, along with another key category focus. And then there was another question about the size of the survey sample, and it's 1,000 adults 18 plus, and that's weighted across important metrics, age, gender, employment, et cetera. I do want to reinforce that the PowerPoint and the supplemental materials we have are going to be available on the website after the webinar today. That also includes an executive summary. And then we've created 4 key infographics. There's a ton of data here, obviously, that's really powerful and useful, but we've tried to really do some top-line summaries that you can use these infographics for with your clients. One is focused on this upcoming key retail seasons around Mother's Day, Father's Day, graduations and weddings. There is a standalone one for the automotive category. There's one that's really focused on summer travel and vacation. And then the last one is all about increased consumer mobility, commuting, and then engagement with out-of-home ads overall. So with that, John, are there any closing thoughts you'd like to add or?
Well, only one thing, Steve, just on the time stamping of the data, just to reassure folks that this data wasn't stale bread. And,
Sure.
and that is that the data that we conducted specific to the out-of-home industry was in mid-February. That was the out-of-home custom that I sort of shared in the last, maybe 10, 15 minutes or so. But all that other data around, COVID, getting back out there, desire to travel, that's trended data weekly that has been rolled right up to this past weekend. And I think, we also have a lot of other Harvard Harris poll data on the situation with Ukraine, the situation in the economy. My takeaway from this is Americans are so pent up and desiring for some reconnection to get back out there. They are so stressed with all these existential threats. And despite everything that's going on in the world, with one major caveat, well, two, one I won't talk about, an escalation of a war, but a return of a variant, that's the only thing that I see suppressing sort of Americans getting back out there. This is a very much pent-up demand, desire to reconnect with family and friends and to take vacations. And I think you saw that with the senior data. This is you only live once. It's time to get back on with our lives. And I haven't seen the data that strong since we've been doing this tracking for over 3 years.
Well, terrific. I can't thank you enough, John, and the excellent research team that we get to work with at the Harris Poll. They do a terrific job. And again, members, you'll be able to access all these assets here pretty quickly this afternoon. So John, looking forward to our next study and our next webinar. You bet, Steve. And I invite any of the membership from OAAA to crowdsource some questions with us, send us your thoughts and ideas. That would give us some great fodder for the next survey. Great. Thank you everyone for joining us today. And please use the materials. Take care. Bye.